So it appears that the Joe Budden podcast is playing a little musical chairs lately. If you haven't heard or haven't noticed, Melissa Ford is no longer a co-host on the show, and Joe recently made the announcement that he is bringing on Mona Love as the new co-host. Now, Mona Love is from the Don't Call Me White Girl podcast, and she also was on $1 million Worth of Game with Gillian Wallow once upon a time. And it has definitely caused some conversations within the hip hop industry and within the media industry in general. And the internet has had their opinions, and I'm here to obviously give you my opinion. But first, before I do that, let's get into her background and how she ultimately ended up on the Joe Budden podcast. So, unless you've been living under a rock, obviously you know that Melissa Ford got her start doing hip hop videos back in the 90s. She also graced the cover of many magazines. I'm not going to name all the magazines. So, 2016, she was on Hollywood Unlocked with Jason Lee, and I think she was on that show up until about 2020. She ended up joining the Joe Budden podcast in November of 2024. So it hasn't even really been a full year that she's been on the JBP. The Joe Budden podcast is kind of like it's like barbershop talk for guys. And sometimes if you don't have a strong personality fitting into that type of dynamic or that type of environment, it could be a little uncomfortable. And there were moments in the show where you could tell she was very uncomfortable. I'm pretty sure there were many conversations behind the scenes to try to make her feel more comfortable and make her understand some of the jokes that were being said on there weren't, they weren't trying to be mean or malicious or anything like that. So you would notice a change in her responses to some of the jokes and some of the things that are being said on the show as time went on, right? And then Joe went and added Mark Lamont Hill to the show. Now, Mark Lamont Hill is, he's very accomplished in the media space. He's done BET, he's done Al Jazeera, he's also been on CNN. I believe he has his own show on YouTube as well. So him and Mel brought like that intellectual conversation to the show. But what has been revealed, or what has been rumored rather, is that Melissa Ford and Mark may have potentially had like a romantic relationship back in the day. It's interesting that this conversation is coming about now because you could see moments on the show where they would have their little disagreements, and it was interesting to watch it play out live on camera, because sometimes you can't distinguish whether or not it's just potting or if they are actually really having a disagreement on something, or if it's something that really hit close to home for them. But most recently they had a conversation on the show that got a little touchy, and I'm sure that conversation ended up continuing off camera, because not too long after that uh, conversation that they had on camera, you definitely didn't see Mel on the show anymore. At first, it was just like, wait a minute, maybe she's focusing on her own podcast because she now has her podcast. Maybe she's on vacation. But then weeks started to go by, and we would see no Melissa Ford. Fast forward to last week, Joe announced that Mona Love is now a co-host on the show. Now, here's my thoughts on that, right? Because when Joe brought on Flip is kind of like a wild card. Flip doesn't really have poignant points on the show. He more like he kind of says things from a street aspect, and you can tell that he's not as seasoned as Joe and as Ice and Ish when it comes to the industry and those topics, those type of conversations. But um, I'm not trying to downplay Flip's role on the show at all. But bringing Mona on the show to me kind of seems like a female version of Flip. What I mean by that is she has the same, I don't know if her depth of conversation is as intellectual as a Mark. But I will say from what I know of her, her and Flip could probably have their own show together, if that makes sense, right? Now, the thing about her is she doesn't take lightly to the jokes that Joe and the guys may throw at her. Where you would see Melissa Ford kind of like she wouldn't know what to say at certain points in the podcast. Like they would say certain things, she didn't really know how to respond. But Mona, on the other hand, she ain't going for none of the jokes. Like I think she will set them straight, like right on air. There won't be no conversations off camera if they play with her in any kind of way. Um, I think she will let it be known like she ain't the one to play with. You know, the guys would make like little jokes about Mel. They would call her like Merlot Mel, and um, you know, Flip would ultimately stand up for Melissa. He would always be the one to stand up for her when the guys would kind of go overboard or they would kind of pile on her. And I think Mona adds like a level of ratchet that Joe appreciates. Like he feel like he can speak to her like one of the guys. With Mel, it wasn't really like that. He had to be more soft and more delicate. And to me, that takes away from the authenticity of the show. Like I believe that show is known for having a level of ratchetness, having a level of messiness. Like Joe's been known to just flat out say people's album is trash, and he would take some backlash for it, and whatever came with it, he was willing to deal with it afterwards, right? But I think with Mona, she has like a very strong personality. From the first episode that I did hear, she can kind of overtalk people a little bit, and there is the possibility of her saying something that could require some damage control for Joe and the guys, but we'll see how this all plays out. You know, I do know one thing that the jokes that they would usually tell on Melissa that could be disguised as just potting. Yeah, Mona's not gonna take it as lightly. So y'all let me know in the comments what y'all think. Do y'all think that this is a good fit? After hearing that first episode, do y'all think that this is something that's going to work out long term? Or do you think Joe will continue to play musical chairs and then ultimately just make it a all guys cast? So, but I appreciate y'all checking in, man. Make sure y'all check out the clothing brand, of course. You see it. And yeah, man, continue to share the video, continue to show me love. I appreciate all the love. I appreciate all the support, even from those of you who don't even know me. It's all love, man. I really do appreciate it, man. Until next time.